There we go. Sorry if that took you for a moment there. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dustin Cormier. Welcome to another episode of How to Rock Astrology. As you guys can see, I've got my COVID hair happening. It's the longest my hair has ever been, I think, and it's just totally nuts right now. Welcome. Hopefully you guys can hear my audio now. I wonder if any of my viewers watching live can just let me know if you can or can't hear me. That would help me a little bit. But I digress. I think we're good to go. So I'm just going to start rocking. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to continue our conversation, basically reading quite directly from Astrology, Karma, and Transformation by Stephen Arroyo, talking about the inner dimensions of the birth chart and relating karma, the karma of our past lives, the karma of continuing crystallized strands of conscious or unconscious data, meeting fate and destiny with other strands of karma through transit, through dasha, what have you, so that this is what these outer planets are all about. We have these deep experiences where the unconscious karmas of our past meet in today's reality, and they don't always align very well. They can shift, and they can cause transformation between each other. This is the kind of thing that we talk about when we describe, especially the outer planets, which Stephen Arroyo even kind of considers to be Jupiter, Saturn, as well as especially Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. It's these bigger. I always make a metaphor for, we're gonna start getting into everything. Obviously, I always like to make a metaphor for these outer planets as being somewhat like, think of somebody who's fishing. Now, if you only throw your rod a little bit, you're fishing in a lake full of algae. You throw out your rod, and let's say it's Mars. It only goes this far. As you reel it back, it takes on a little bit of algae, but it's easy to shake it off. It's easy to throw away that algae. Put on your bait again, and you send another one, and now it's going farther this time. Now it's Jupiter's length from the sun. Jupiter is it takes longer to revolve around the sun. It's a heavier karmic implication. And when you reel it in, it's got more of that algae, more cosmic power, more crystallized data representing something in the soul. Jupiter is particularly usually a very good one. We know it to be a benefic, of course. But even this benefic nature has karma associated with it. If you're denied Jupiter, then all of the algae that's on your Jupiter, let's say if your Jupiter is conjunct something debilitating like Saturn or Mercury or Venus, then Jupiter's going to be starved, and all that joy that you've been wanting to express gets obstructed in this incarnation, and you've got to deal with that. And now that's just Jupiter. Saturn is a further fishing rod. Get it all out there, and as you reel it back in, you get even more algae, even more crystallized data in karma. So this is kind of the image I'm trying to say for these outer planets, is that it takes us longer to knead through and work through and deconstruct and reconstruct properly the outer planets. And the thing about them is that because they have so much algae, because they have so much karma, that karma is energy, which we, as spiritual, transformative, shamanic people interested in today's time in using our karmas to extract the most logical and effective excision of all the data that we've come through. We in today's time want to learn how we can use that to our advantage. Karma is not a bad thing, or else it wouldn't be what it is. We're all imperfect, and it's our imperfections that give us the meaning and purpose that we can apply in this incarnation. or else we wouldn't have anything to cleanse. We would have nothing to purge, nothing to transform. It's the darkness of karma, the darkness of the unconscious, that gives the light of our illumination meaning and purpose. And that's why we are all incarnated here on Earth at this time. So, with all that being said, that's just my own little riff. If you've been watching, this is particularly the intro video for the Uranus and Neptune part of this video series. Today in particular, we're going to talk about Uranus and Neptune and Pluto as keys to transformation, critical keys that act in different ways. I'm a Jyotish Vedic astrologer, and I've been really ringing that bell in my practice and in my life and in my experience. But this is a Western book. What I'm really trying to do here, on my channel in general, is bring the Vedic, Jyotish, ancient Indian astrology wisdom to the Westerners. But I'm also trying to take Western astrology through the likes of someone like Stephen Arroyo, who's a very highly touted Western psycho practitioner. He's a therapist, he's a astral counselor, and he was kind of a psychologist first. He's really into Jungian psychology, and he applies astrology to psychology in his grounded psychological practice. And so that's why I consider this to be a great Western tome filled with Stephen Arroyo's own personal clinical research on how these planets express in a chart and how to deal with them as a counselor. This is counselor consciousness in particularly happening in today's video, in this series, I should say. So it's one thing to know the symbols and their esoteric meaning. It's another thing entirely to explain them practically to somebody in a way that they can grasp and relate to. Now, if you're an astrologer who's not looking to become a genius astrological counselor, I think that this series will still give you the tools and the keys that you need to understand how you can best relate to your astrologer. Because your astrologer needs you to know the language so that they can transmit their light to you, just as much as they also need to know the language. You need to be a good receptacle for the divine wisdom and insight of your astrologer. And I think that this book series is going to help you to learn how to best do so. So, welcome. Hopefully it all comes through in the way that I hope and think it will. Now, for those of you watching live, this is a live stream. You can feel free to leave comments, leave some concerns, ask some questions, and I'll try to speak to all the questions and comments that are asked as befits the nature of our video. So, welcome, folks. Without further ado, I believe that we are going to get started. We were looking at Stephen Arroyo's chart. I believe that he is I think he's Libra Sun with Aries rising. And I often see in Stephen Arroyo this cool contrast between a knowledge of the other person, but also an intrinsic sense of what he has learned through his specific experience as an astrologer. I think this book represents an important blending principle between, it shows like a person who has his own Uranus intuition about how to apply astrology, but he takes it in a web of the present day of astrology when the book was written. And I think it goes timelessly even beyond his present day. The book was written in... I always like to look at these things. Right, originally written in 1978, re-released in 1992, when there was a bit of a renaissance in astrology going on. I digress, ladies and gentlemen. Now we are going to get into, after my 15-minute intro, this is going to be our starting reading of Astrology, Karma, and Transformation by Stephen Arroyo. We're going to be advancing into Chapter 3. Now, if you've been watching from our original video from previously, we're on Chapter 3 after having read Chapter 1 and 2. But if you're just wanting to know more about Uranus and Neptune, then you don't have to watch the other videos to get something out of this video. And as usual, Stephen Arroyo has a visual yantra, a mosaic, drawn by an artist, which is meant to reflect a little bit of the wisdom of the chapter that we'll be reading. This chapter is the third chapter, and it relates with Gemini and the wisdom of Gemini. It's interesting that he chose the picture of Gemini for a descriptor of this chapter being keys to transformation, Uranus and Neptune. It's almost as if there's a two-faced conversation happening between the past karma and the expressed intuitive conception of the best way to use that karma, that being the outer planets. It's almost like there's a conversation happening between the ego and karma that I am and the transformation that I seek. Gemini has this funny way of blending the past and the present and the future, blending things, linguistic concepts into a fluid breeze of what ought to be now. This is Keys to Transformation, Part 1, Uranus and Neptune. And, I like to show these little things. He starts off with this classic, I wonder if I can get this to work here, this classic quote by Shakespeare from The Tempest. "Be cheerful, sir, our revels are now ended. These are actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits, and are melted into air, into thin air. And, like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, yea, all which it inherit, shall dissolve, and, like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep." It's really one of my favorite quotes ever. It's Shakespeare, The Tempest, very psychedelic. "These our actors have melted into thin air. The great globe itself, all it inherit, shall dissolve, and like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made on." This is very important, especially for the sake of Neptune. In Vedic astrology, Neptune is considered to be ruled by Vishnu. And Neptune, when we're dealing with Neptune, we're going to find that we often are dealing with the life that we're living right now, trying to see the divine in everything, because you are perfectly living in every moment the life that you're meant to be living. You just have to see it and understand it. And Neptune is what can make you realize. Neptune is the yearning for the best and most sentimental moments in our existence. The open heart that's available permeating all times. When we look back at the best moments in our life, we always think, gosh, I just didn't realize how good I had it in that moment. Now things have changed, things are different. But you can still see the best of everything that you've been if you have the right consciousness, if Neptune has been pulling you to see the divine within the mundane. I could wax poetic about it, but let's start reading from our book. Keys to Transformation, Part 1, Uranus and Neptune. In the past decade, a great deal has been written about the meaning of the Trans-Saturnian planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. It would be impossible for me to condense all these suggested meanings in the scope of 1 or 2 chapters, and indeed, that's not my main purpose here in this book. In this chapter, I'll try to clarify the functional significance of these planets, i.e., the dynamic quality of life changes and personal transformation symbolized by these planets, as these energies and dimensions of experience are immediately felt by the individual. One is often told in astrological writings or lectures that these planets refer to simply and solely to group qualities, generational differences, or a mass karma. You know, it's like everyone says, oh, what does it even mean that you have Uranus in Capricorn? You know, everyone in a 7-year generation of between you has has Uranus in Capricorn. So they think because it's that long and everybody in that same area has it, it's like you can't even feel the changing of it. But this is the wrong perspective entirely. While these planets undeniably are related to these factors, Stephen Arroyo says, the psychologically oriented astrologer counselor needs to know the meaning of the Trans-Saturnians in the individual life from a practical, experiential viewpoint. These forces, after all, can only operate through a particular group if they act through the individuals comprising that group. Since I feel that Uranus and, these forces that are generational per se, I've got Uranus and Neptune in Capricorn. And these planets can only operate through a particular... I'm a part of that group. I'm a part of the Neptune and Capricorn group. And these forces are looking to act through everyone in my generation. But these forces can only operate through a particular group if they act through the individuals comprising that group, including someone like me, who has that Neptune and Capricorn is in my 6th house. It's with Rahu also, and it's with an important planet, my 7th lord, Saturn. It's not with it, but it is infusing Saturn with its qualities. So someone like me, I feel like I'm applying it, but I digress. It's the individual has to express the generational energy, and it has to be open to the individual, or else it'll just be another dull note in the chart. For the most part, everybody feels it at some place or another. Stephen Arroyo goes on. Since I feel that Uranus and Neptune are generally better understood and are explained more clearly in available astrological books than is Pluto, Arroyo tells us that I've devoted the entire next chapter, Keys to Transformation Part 2, which we're going to do in like 2 weeks from now. I've devoted the entire next chapter to discussing Pluto in some depth, whereas this chapter treats all 3 Trans-Saturnian planets as a group of related transformative energies. This Part 1 has particular emphasis on Uranus and Neptune. Through the influence of these transcendent forces, a human being experiences great changes in his thought patterns, level of consciousness, lifestyle, and capacity for self-expression. It is my feeling that the Trans-Saturnian planets most immediately influence the deepest psychic life of the individual. Because these planets have been pulling so much of that algae from the furthest part of the lake before making it back to a transformative state. However, the power of these forces is often so great that they burst out of their psychic confines, as it were, into the world. Therefore, they manifest as changes in the physical world as well. One school of thought in modern astrology that deals with human development in terms of soul growth holds that the Trans-Saturnians will only powerfully influence a soul which has to some extent awakened to spiritual truth. These planets as energies, it is said, affect our subtle bodies, but only when the soul has reached the stage of evolution where these are ready to be awakened. It's theorized that as the age of Aquarius advances, more and more souls would be influenced by the Trans-Saturnians. And these planets will have the effect of starting the soul on a higher spiral of development. Stephen Arroyo says, I agree that the Trans-Saturnians refer to a higher vibration, or at least to more refined and penetrating forces than do the 7 planets of ancient astrology. I also concur with the idea that the level of awareness of the individual affects how the Trans-Saturnians' influence will be experienced. The Trans-Saturnian planets means farther than Saturn, the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. But I feel that it is too vast a generalization to state that only highly evolved souls are responsive to the energies of these planets. One might more correctly say that a more aware person, a more woke person, is capable of being a channel for the expression of the purest, most refined, and most constructive manifestations of these forces, as is the case with all the planets. But by no means can we assert that destructive revolutionaries are unresponsive to Uranus, mafia members to Pluto, and drug addicts to Neptune. These people are surely expressing one aspect of the Trans-Saturnians' power in their lives, although not in the optimum mode of expression, obviously. It's a really beautiful distinction there. Just going to check if I got any questions. As usual, folks, this is a live stream, so feel free to ask questions. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto symbolize forces that constantly prompt change and, hopefully, growth in our consciousness. The eminent astrologer Dane Rudyard has referred to the Trans-Saturnians as ambassadors of the galaxy. In an article published in Astro View magazine, Dane Rudyard states, any organic system or cosmic unit is subjected to 2 contrary forces. There's the pull, which draws every part of the system to the center, for instance, the pull of gravitation. But there's also the pull exerted by outer space, which actually means by a larger system within which the first system operates. Every planet of our solar system and every living being on Earth is to some degree affected by the pressures and pulls which reach us from the galaxy. we are also affected in an opposite direction by the gravitational power of the Sun, the center of our system. Saturn, however, represents a basic line of demarcation between these two opposite forces, galactic and solar. The planets inside of Saturn's orbit are mainly creatures and vessels of the Sun, while the planets beyond Saturn are what I have called many years ago ambassadors of the galaxy. Wow, that's awesome. The ambassadors of the galaxy that are past Saturn focus upon the solar system, the power of this vast community of stars, the galaxy. They do not completely belong to the solar system. It's Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. These are ambassadors of the galaxy beyond our centrifugal holding individuation. The Trans-Saturnians are within its sphere of influence to do a job, to link our small system, of which the Sun is the center and Saturn's orbit is the circumference, within the larger system, the galaxy. So, these planets are not, the Trans-Saturnian planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, don't completely belong to the solar system per se. They're within its sphere of influence of our solar system. They're here to do a job, which is to link our small system, of which the Sun is the center, and Saturn's orbit is the circumference, with the larger system, the galaxy. I know I just said that twice, but I often like to cinch things like that. That was Dane Rudyard in an article published in Astroview magazine. So, Stephen Arroyo goes on. That the Trans-Saturnian planets are the symbols of cosmic or galactic forces which impel and in actual experience often expel the individual to grow and to join his consciousness with greater, more comprehensive forces of life. This is revealed in numerous ways. First, the Trans-Saturnians, as observed from Earth, move slowly. Therefore, each remains in one sign of the zodiac for many years. Thus do we find entire generations of men and women experiencing generally similar changes, although the specific focus of the change differs from person to person, according to the house positions and aspects with other planets. Everyone in a certain generation is going to feel Uranus throughout its 7-year stint in, let's say, Scorpio. But, let me think. This might be more of a dull note for a Sagittarius, for whom that Uranus is transiting, is in their natal 12th house. Might be very different from a Sagittarius rising if there's no aspects to that Uranus. It could be completely different from a Scorpio rising, for whom that natal Uranus is in the ascendant sign, as being aspected by Mars or this or that other planet. It brings it out the richness of that generational energy. Stephen Arroyo continues. Secondly, we can see in chart comparisons how the cosmic evolutionary forces operate through individual persons, coming to a specific focus in the relationship of one person to another. The perennial generation gap is a good example of how the Trans-Saturnian planets correspond with the experience of pressure toward growth and more inclusive consciousness. There's often a rather painful awakening to our need to develop a more open, holistic approach to life that results from in-depth contact with people of different generations. In a chart comparison between two people born a few decades apart, the outer three planets will fall not only in different signs in the individual charts, but also usually in different houses of the other person's chart when one uses the chart comparison method of placing one person's natal planets in the other person's natal chart. I believe that's a composite chart. I don't know my relationship astrology like I would like to. It's something I haven't studied yet, but I digress. In other words, if I place my second house natal Pluto, which is in, say, 2 degrees of Leo, at 2 degrees Leo of my father's chart, it may fall in any of his natal houses, but it's very unlikely that it will fall in the same house where his natal Pluto is located. On the other hand, if I place my natal Pluto at 2 degrees Leo in the chart of a person whose age is within a few years of mine, the chances are great that my natal Pluto will fall in the same house in their chart where their natal Pluto is located. We can thus see that the types of major changes prompted by close relationships between people of quite different ages are likely to be of an entirely new order, affecting both people in totally, completely, utterly new ways, and pressuring them to transform or radically alter their approach to specific areas of life. To further clarify this point, suppose the natal Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto of a person 20 years older or younger than myself falls in my 9th house. There would then be the strong potential for that individual's influence upon my ideals, beliefs, religious orientations, and plans for self-improvement, it's the 9th house, to be revolutionizing, it's Uranus, refining or spiritualizing, Neptune, or profoundly transforming, Pluto. So if someone has Uranus in my 9th and they're 20 years older or younger than me, it's a new influence from a type of consciousness that I've never dealt with, and their Pluto is digging right into my 9th house, forcing me to either revolutionize my cultural beliefs and thoughts, to refine or spiritualize and think in a new and transcendental way about my beliefs, my ethic, my meaning in life, or to just completely, utterly transform it if they have Pluto in my 9th. In a situation like this, therefore, the Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto energies affect both people in new and challenging ways. Encountering people of different generations, therefore, can be more difficult than relating to our peers, since such relationships necessarily jolt us out of our old patterns of thought and behavior in some sphere of life. Such relationships necessitate that we grow in order to become more inclusive, one could say, cosmic. Hence, relationships with people of different generations often threaten us and often require a great deal of effort. We may have to face some kind of pain in the area indicated, or some form of anxiety, as we are challenged to transform our attitudes. But, as Jung wrote, there's no coming to consciousness without pain. Some of us, of course, do welcome challenges and opportunities to learn from those who have a different perspective on life and a markedly different variety of life experience. If we can remain open to life and to new learning, based to some extent on our awareness of the value of other people's experience, these challenging encounters with others of different generations will be welcomed and even enjoyed. So they should. The basic personal factors in any individual's life are always the same. These essential forces, or dimensions of life, have existed in all human beings throughout the ages. They motivate distinct orientations in an individual's conscious life, although the degree to which they are admitted to conscious awareness depends greatly upon not only the interrelationship between these factors with the individual, symbolized by aspects between planets, but also upon the environmental influences and cultural norms at a particular time and place. Astrologically, these forces, which are, I repeat, the essential personal factors in any individual's conscious life, these forces are symbolized by the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. He gives us a note down here that's not relevant. Jupiter and Saturn constitute an intermediary step between the personal planets and the transpersonal, impersonal forces of the Trans-Saturnians, since they so often have to do with our participation in society and with socially colored norms, beliefs, and ambitions. It's Jupiter and Saturn. So Jupiter, this is interesting what he's saying here, and he's right about Jupiter in the sense. But Jupiter is so spiritual, I would consider Jupiter as one of the personal planets. It's one of the 5 Panchatattvas. I mean, technically Saturn would be too in that case. But this is just, he's making a point here, so let's just hear it out. Jupiter and Saturn are an intermediary step between the personal planets and the transpersonal, impersonal forces of the Trans-Saturnians, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Since they, Jupiter and Saturn, often have so much to do with our participation in society, with socially colored norms, beliefs, and ambitions. The signs, houses, and aspects in which we find these 7 planets indicate the particular ways in which these forces operate in an individual. The factors symbolized by these 7 planets are, to some extent, modifiable through conscious experience and by the concentrated use of the will. Modifiable through conscious experience and by the concentrated use of the will. It's these 7, the classic 7 planets, not including Rahu, Ketu, or the Trans-Saturnians. Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn. It's interesting that he says modifiable through conscious experience, these planets are. But, as he goes on, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, on the other hand, are totally beyond conscious control, just as the actual planets are markedly beyond the Earth. Therefore, a person cannot control the energies of these planets at all, but they can control their attitude towards the influence of these planets in their life. One can modify his conscious orientation towards the manifestations of these greater forces. In terms of their function, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, as stated above, always prompt change in the area of life affected. This change will usually come harmoniously and without too much disruption if these planets are in easy aspect with the other 7 planets. especially if they're in positive, auspicious houses from the rising sign. If they're in the 5th, the 9th, aspects count, and the strength of their lord, the dispositor, also counts, in my opinion. However, if the Trans-Saturnian planets are in stressful aspects with the other planets, the change, whatever change or transformation is implied by transit or some kind of energy coming from an outer planet, if they have harsh aspects, if their lord or dispositor is not doing well, the changes and transformations that these planets bring on will be more difficult to handle. That is, we will experience difficulty in mastering the situation, and we may be overwhelmed by these forces, for the Trans-Saturnians symbolize energies that are far more powerful than any of the other planets. Willpower and determination alone are never enough to cope with these energies. There's something else that's needed. Some kind of heart experience that blends the will and determination with some level of the heart. That's my personal note. Stephen Arroyo goes on. For example, if one of the Trans-Saturnians is in a square aspect to another planet, these forces are at odds with each other. I wouldn't always put it so. Western astrology is obsessed with squares and trines. I'm a Vedic astrologer. I have a different idea. And if you're a Vedic astrologer, consider your own brand of ill aspects towards the outer planet to configure when there's something ill going on and there's an ill relationship. So, these forces, if one of the Trans-Saturnians is in an ill aspect with another planet, these forces are at odds with each other. Necessarily, something's got to give. We can sometimes resist the increasing pressure for change in our lives for quite a long time. But eventually, we come to realize that such resistance is, in effect, resistance to that which would make us more whole and thus more human. Our resistance is therefore ultimately self-defeating when it comes to what these planets deliver. An example of such a stressful aspect in the natal chart appears in the horoscope of Meher Baba. Okay, so it looks like Stephen Arroyo is going to give us an example of an aspect in real life through Meher Baba, an Indian teacher revered by his devotees as an incarnation of God. In fact, Meher Baba himself, when asked if he was God, replied, "Who else could I be?" Nice. Aren't we all? In Meher Baba's chart, we find the sun in the first house in square aspect to a conjunction of Pluto and Neptune in the fourth house. Wow. So let's the sun in the first house, square Pluto and Neptune conjunct in the fourth house. The Pluto, Arroyo notes that this Pluto and Neptune conjunction is also quincunx to the moon in the ninth house. Therefore, the sense of conscious identity, it's the sun being especially strong in the first house, this strong sense of conscious identity in Meher Baba was at odds with the powerful forces represented by Pluto and Neptune in the fourth house, the fundamental roots of one's being. With such great energy generated in this tense square aspect, something had to give. And what gave was the sense of being an individual, separate entity. The sun factor being in that first house, therefore, this became a channel through which the greater forces could manifest. The moon became symbolically a factor for the dissemination and focalization of these forces. If we realize that Neptune symbolizes, in part, mystical consciousness, and that the Pluto represents potential spiritual rebirth, we have the symbolic key to the kind of cosmic energies that we're manifesting through this great teacher. The house positions of the sun and moon, the channels through which these forces operated, reveal in what areas of life such influences manifested. The sun in the first house, the house of identity, is an apt symbol for one who has so completely identified himself with life's creative power. The moon in the ninth house, the house of religion and truth-seeking, provides a symbol of a spiritual teacher. So again, this is a very Western descriptive of aspects and the way aspects work. I'm gonna try to stay true to letting the text come through as it is. Every now and then I'll try to say my own opinion of whether I think something in Jyotish would deal with this differently and probably better. This is a book written in it's released in 1992, so I think that modern astrology might think about a lot of these things in different ways. But I think we ought to read the book as it is, just to digest it, and then we can talk about it from there, right? So all in all, this example demonstrates how the Trans-Saturnians in a natal chart, in Meher Baba's chart, for example, are to be interpreted. The focalization of the changes in one's life due to the pressure of greater forces desiring manifestation. This can be pinpointed by examining the close aspects with Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. The Trans-Saturnians, therefore, act through us by activating, as it were, the psychological factors represented by Saturn, Jupiter, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Sun, and Moon. It is as if the energy flows from Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto through the channels symbolized by the other 7 planets. The aspects involved provide a key to this flow of energy. And in chapter 6, he kind of delves more into the aspects of these planets together. So there's really a point being made here about how the outer planets need the first 7 classical planets for expression, because they represent different parts of the basic chakra energy field schema. If you look on my channel, you can find Interpreting the Outer Planets, where I talk about the chakra vibe of these outer planets and how they relate to the 7 original planets. There's 6 chakras, and they're all contained by those 7 planets, the 6th chakra being Sun and Moon. So the outer planets, I always like to say, they're not a part of the human energy field until they interact with that planet, that dimension, that house, that theme poignantly related to one of the 6 chakras, one of the 6 parts of the earthly energy field, as I like to say. I mean, I don't want to go too far onto my own ideas about this. Vedic astrology has always talked about the chakras as being reflected through the planets. I could even, just to give you a glimpse of what I'm talking about, okay? The summer solstice is the peak of the sun. And Cancer and Leo represent the 6th chakra. Then after Leo is Virgo, it's the 5th chakra, Mercury, voice. After Virgo is Libra, green, heart chakra. After Libra is Scorpio, solar plexus, Mars chakra. After Scorpio is Sagittarius, pleasure, sexuality, inner enjoyment, inner exploration. After that is the root chakra, which is Saturn, Capricorn. And then it flips up again. Aquarius is also ruled by Saturn, red chakra. Then Pisces is ruled by Jupiter. You see that it's building up again? Pisces is ruled by Jupiter. Mars is ruled by Aries, Mars, solar plexus. Taurus is ruled by Venus, green, heart chakra. Gemini is blue, fifth chakra, voice, Mercury. And then Cancer comes back again on the sixth chakra, right? There's no room in there for the Trans-Saturnian planets. Rather, this part of our energy field, the earthbound dimension, the personal planets, which can be worked on through conscious employment, they are the channels for the psychedelic, deep, karmic, transformative karma energies of these depersonalizing outer planet energies. And that's kind of just what Arroyo is telling us there. So I've got to go to the bathroom real quick, folks. And when I come back, we've just got a little bit left here, so I'm gonna finish this up, and then I'm probably going to we'll call it. We're gonna end this video, and then we're gonna go on to our next video. But if you're watching live, you can keep joining the videos and being a part of the conversation. So, continuing from Stephen Arroyo, after having taken note of the example of Meher Baba and how those outer planets, he had Pluto and the Sun in the first house, and then Pluto and Neptune in the fourth house, kind of like how the psychedelic extraterrestrial agencies of the unconscious were pouring through the roots of himself, and he was observing and contemplating those roots. But the sun still had an ego that it wanted to express through him, and this the square of that is what brought out the fruits of those outer planets. This is the kind of thing that we often see when we find spiritual people who are being open channels for the obliteration of the ego holding, to let these Trans-Saturnian planets come through. Stephen Arroyo goes on. Since Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto move through the ecliptic so slowly with reference to the Earth, they do have specific effects upon particular generations of human beings. These influences are altered according to the culture prevailing in a certain area. Aspects to the Trans-Saturnians in the natal chart, therefore, reveal how an individual is attuned to the forces of change, manifesting not only within himself, but also during a particular era. With respect to the social environment, therefore, and in relation to the various currents of social change at a specific time, we may ask, will the person be an arch-conservative, a total revolutionary, or somewhat more moderate? Is this person in tune with the forces of change in his times and open to the messages from the ambassadors of the galaxy? Or is he opposed or indifferent to these birth pangs of a new consciousness? In addition to the natal house positions and aspects, the transits of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are also highly significant. These will be dealt with in some detail in Chapter 9. In this book, it goes into greater detail of these things. We might get there eventually in these readings. But it might be mentioned here that transits of these planets over sensitive points in the natal chart are the most penetrating and far-reaching of all transits, and their ultimate effects are the most comprehensive and long-lasting. In the following sections of this chapter, I will briefly describe the meaning of each of the Trans-Saturnian planets, and I will also mention how transits of these planets are experienced by the individual. So this next part is going to give us a sense of all of these things, of how transits are experienced and the meaning of the Trans-Saturnian planets that we're talking about. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you guys enjoyed that. I'm going to go to the bathroom, and when I come back, we're going to continue. And this next part of our video series is going to be specifically talking about Uranus and its implications in the natal chart and in transit. See you soon, folks.